The hardest part about landscape design is figuring out where to start. Let me guide you through 3 essential steps to kickstart your journey into creating a beautiful outdoor space. With 5 years of industry experience and a degree in horticulture, every great landscape starts with 2 things: understanding your family needs and knowing your site. The reason we start with a needs analysis: sometimes people get too excited about their projects and they jump in head first without a game plan. So that's why a family needs analysis is so important. Grab a notebook and write down all the needs that your family has. Everything that your outdoor space is going to be used for. So you can write down things you're interested in, like perhaps you would like a private reading area, a garden space, lawn, herbs, flowers. Write down all the things that you're interested in, as well as different kind of colors that you like, any plants and shrubs in particular that you would like to add to your space. Grab a list and write all those things down so we can have a game plan on how we're going to add those into our landscape design later once we get to that process. Once you have all your needs and wants written down on a piece of paper, we're going to do a site survey. Now that's a big word, but it's not too scary, I promise. So essentially, it's really useful if you have a measuring wheel. You can get those at like Lowe's or Home Depot. I'm going to assume that you either have a new site that you're wanting to work on, or you have a pre-existing home that you're wanting to refurbish. But the first thing we're going to do in either case is we're going to measure out your property lines as well as the perimeter of your house. And this is going to help us get a baseline understanding of how much space we have to work with. Now, if you have access to any of your house plans, your property lines, any kind of documents, that's going to help you a bunch to save you some time and work. But in case you don't, just doing it by hand with the measuring wheel is going to be the best way to do it. And so once you have your house and your property lines, you can also measure any pre-existing things such as a driveway, sidewalks, a shed, anything that's more permanent that's going to stay. We want to make sure we're measuring those and also roughly where those are at in relation to your house. Another tip that you can use is you can use a site like Google Earth to kind of help you get a better estimate on where things are if things are a little bit more disconnected for you. So that's something that I would personally use. You can use Google Earth and be able to, and they have a measuring tool that you can use to help at least give you a good estimate on the location of everything on your site. Before you plant even a single flower, there's one more step that we're going to cover. Let's take a closer look at the conditions on your property to help set your landscape for success. The first thing we're going to talk about is growing zones. Now you can find this pretty easily if you search USAID growing zones. You put in your zip code and find what the growing zone is for your area. And the reason it's important to know this is because we want to make sure whatever plants we're going to put in, I like to call this section the plant preparation before the plant selection. And so we want to make sure we understand our site conditions. So whatever plants we select, we know they're going to have a pretty good chance to being able to establish themselves, to be able to be happy and to be able to grow in that spot where you put them for the long term. Of course, things are going to happen, things are going to die, but we're going to try to minimize that risk as much as we can. So a general tip that I would give for your growing zone, because that is just your average winter temperature. We want to make sure we're prepared for below and above average temperatures. So when you're choosing your plants, make sure that you're giving them a good range so they have a bit of flexibility on that growing zone. Because if you, for example, say you live in zone 7 and you put a shrub that is hardy from zone 9 to 7, so what happens when you have a below average winter? Say you have a zone 6 winter, that's going to kill that shrub. So those are the things we're trying to avoid as much as we can. So next up, we're going to talk about soil and lighting, and both of these are very important. So we'll first talk about lighting. So we want to make sure we have a rough idea of what the lighting is on our property. If you have any pre-existing trees that you know is going to catch a shady area, make sure to roughly mark out where those spots are and be able to keep a note of them when we start to prepare our base map. Another point of interest that I would like to talk about is microclimates. This exists because the sun isn't directly hitting all sides evenly. So pretty much the south and the west facing parts of your home are going to be more hotter and drier than the north and east facing sides. And that's if you live in the northern hemisphere. And if you're down in the southern hemisphere, it's the opposite. So that's how the sun works, and we want to make sure that we're prepared for that. And a lot of times those microclimates can be a whole zone hotter or colder than what your assigned one is. So that's something to think about. Sometimes you can get away with putting something that's a bit more tender and isn't quite as winter hardy in a warmer microclimate. And it can still overwinter. Like for example, if you have a brick wall, sometimes that keeps enough warmth to keep those plants alive. That's just something to consider and something to remember when we're choosing in our plant selection. And moving on to soils, you want to live by the motto, poor soils produce poor flowers. So I recommend getting a soil test, and a lot of times you can get these for free at your local county extension office if you live in the United States. But a soil test is very important because it's going to help tell you what the chemical makeup of your soil is. Because soil isn't just dirt, it has so many different parts to it, from clay to sand to silt to compost to organic matter. There's a lot of things that go into it, as well as the pH levels of your soil. And depending on what those levels are, some plants are going to do better or worse in it. And generally my advice is if you have poor soils at your site, to add some organic matter to it. Some kind of compost or any kind of organic matter will be good. Because that's going to help give a lot more food to your plants. And in general, that would be my overall advice for soils. But I definitely recommend getting a soils test. That's going to tell you what the levels are and what they recommend, any kind of fertilizer or adjustments that you need to make to your soils. You'll be able to figure it out by doing a soils test. And then the next part of our plant preparation is going to be talking about water. We need to have a game plan on how we're going to water these plants. So this is something we need to consider if you're going to install an irrigation system. It depends on the climate you're in if you need one or not. But generally, I would recommend looking into drip irrigation for a lot of your shrubs and trees. It's a very efficient form of irrigation. But understanding how you're going to water these is going to also play a role in your plant selection. If you want to be more hands-off, then I'd probably recommend more drought-hardy and native plants that can probably go without irrigation once they're established. But especially in that first year, you want to make sure you have a plan on how you're going to water all these guys. And so looking into what types of irrigations that you might be interested in is going to be an important step. And so it's just something to consider during your landscape design phase. And I mentioned this in our family needs analysis. But we also want to consider what kind of color palettes that we want to use in our site, what kind of colors that we want to use. There's a lot of different color palettes out there. I'm not going to dive into it this video, but that's something else you want to consider is how are these plants going to look throughout all 4 seasons of the year, because we want to make sure we're creating an attractive landscape design that looks good in all 4 seasons of the year. And if you want to learn more about how you can do that, I recommend that you subscribe to this channel here at Garden Theory, because we're going to cover more about landscape design until the end of this year. We're going to be doing a video every week, and I hope that you can subscribe so you can be notified of when those videos come out. So now moving on to our final step, we're going to be creating a base map. I'm going to get some pen and paper out with y'all, and I'm going to walk through the whole process of how we create a base map. And if you design your landscape without a base map, it's like building a home without a blueprint. The base map is the foundation that we use to create our design on. It's going to help us be able to be more creative, and I'm going to show you through that entire process so we can set the stage together to create your dream landscape. So welcome to my desk. I'm going to try to recreate an old landscape design drawing that I did. I'm just going to copy the house layout on here, take it over to this page, and along that process I'm going to show you how we can use these architect and engineer scales. So I definitely recommend that you get these if you're curious or interested in making a landscape design drawing to scale. I think this helps you out quite a bit if you do. I definitely recommend getting both of them. They're both really good to use. And essentially how they work, for example, here on, I believe this is the engineer scale, it has a little mark. It's probably hard to see on the camera, but actually so it's got a mark here, so it says 10 right there on the corner. And so that pretty much means for every inch, that's 10 feet. So that's kind of how these scale rulers work. And so for this drawing, it's at a scale of every 16th inch is 1 foot. So we just find that scale on our ruler, and that's essentially how we can do this. Alright guys, so we're not perfect, but we created a pretty much a basic shape, mostly in pencil for now. And this is kind of our base map that we're going to go off of. And this is essentially the big square in the middle is our house. And this rectangle down here is a pre-existing driveway. So it's essentially all we want to do at this stage is create the outline for our house, existing features such as driveways or sidewalks. As any pre-existing trees that we're going to keep in at this stage, we want to mark where those are at in our landscape. But this is where we're going to end it off for today. Now we have the foundation to experiment on. And next episode, we're going to get some trace paper, and I'm going to show you form compositions and landscape design styles that you can experiment with. And we're going to use trace paper to do that. And if you want to learn more about the elements and principles of landscape design, one of the first videos I did was on that topic, and I'll have it linked at the end of this clip. And I would definitely recommend you go watch it, as well as watch the other videos here on my channel. Thank you so much for watching today.